For sticking around to the final panel. I hope we can live up to Warren's best for last expectations. So we're talking about ensuring the integrity of the carbon market, which has come up quite a bit over the course of the past 2 days. So we hope we can provide some answers in this panel. So I'll introduce myself, and then maybe I'll pass to each panelist to introduce themselves. And then we've talked a lot about, what's going on in the voluntary carbon market. So I think I'll just give a quick summary of, a few things, and then pass to Edit and everyone else on the panel. So I'm Lourie, Director of Natural Climate Solutions and Aviation at the International Emissions Trading Association, IETA. Edit.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Edith Kiss. I'm Chief Investment Officer at Revalue Nature. We are a next generation nature-based project developer.
Hi everyone, my name is Breanna Lujan and I'm a Senior Manager for Natural Climate Solutions at Environmental Defense Fund.
Hi, good afternoon. I am Lucia Madrid and I work for the Architecture for REDD+ transactions.
Hello everyone, my name is Juan Carlos Hintiach. I am Shuar indigenous from the rainforest of Ecuador. I'm speaking on behalf of COICA, what is indigenous organization, umbrella indigenous organization from Amazon Basin. Thank you.
And I'm Julie Baroody. I represent Verra. We're a standards organization, and I am Senior Director of Forest Carbon Innovation.
Thanks everyone for introducing yourselves. So just really briefly, I think this topic has been touched on quite a bit over the past few sessions and the past few days, but obviously there's been quite a bit of increased interest in the voluntary carbon market, especially over the past few years, which has also led to quite a bit more scrutiny as well into what's sort of going on in the VCM, and that's why we're having this discussion, and hopefully why lots of you are here is because of your interest in these activities. I think an important note that lots of us have talked about in preparation for this panel is that the VCM has been around for decades, and so there are lots of experiences and best practices that have come out of those decades of on the ground experience and practices, and so that's something I think we all want to touch on a little bit anyway in this panel. So I just wanted to sort of start with that opening perspective on the VCM, and then Edit, I think you've been paying some good attention to all of the sessions that we've had so far, and there's been so many themes and ideas coming out of these, and so I understand you have a bit of a summary for us to kind of tie all of that in, especially as we're the final panel of the day. So I'll pass to you for that.
Perfect, thanks a lot, Ellen. And just to say, really pleased to be in this panel. It's super important, and a super important topic. And as you said, yeah, it's very nice actually that we have heard integrity on many panels throughout. So I thought maybe take some of my reflections, also reinforcing some of the points that have come up previously. So starting with the procurement panel that we had yesterday, my takeaway I think was really resonating from most of the speakers is that we really have to not let the perfect be the enemy of good. I know it's a cliche, but it's true. It's a journey, and we heard both, that panel was more focused on the demand side and the buyers, but it's also true for the supply side, and also differentiating the two, because we still see journalists mixing up the two issues around demand and supply side integrity. And the truth is that if you are a buyer and you want to buy a flawless credit with the most beautiful biodiversity net gain and social benefits, you might not find it today, especially not at today's prices. And it's also true the same on this other side, that if you're a seller and you want to sell to a company that is already on its net zero target and has a science-aligned net zero target and has all the interim targets reported and verified, you might not sell your credit today. There have been a study that tried to identify that, and I must say that only a few companies scored, if any. So, but luckily we have the buyer's guide now, so those companies can get on the journey, start engaging, so I think we have hope, and again, we have to recognize that it's a journey on both sides. I also wanted to just put some context on and remind us of the context of what we're trying to do here. The world is not perfect. any market. There are no markets that are perfect. So I had the chance to work a little bit on the cocoa markets, which is intersecting with the carbon markets. And I'm sorry to say, but on the cocoa market, we're still struggling to eliminate child labor and slavery in Africa. And if you Google how much of the revenues go back to the farmers from the chocolate bar price, guess what? It's 5%. So actually, I think we just, again, need to remind ourselves of the challenge. We're trying to create a really perfect market, which does not exist anywhere else. It's a great challenge, so let's do it. But just let's let's appreciate that it takes some steps. From the procurement panel, again, I think when we discussed about the buyers, and we did discuss a little bit about the ecosystems, the need for the whole ecosystem and appreciate the value chain. But so buyers have a limited capacity to influence the design, right? They are sitting at the end of the chain, but they have a huge responsibility how they vote with their purchasing power. And I was really pleased to hear, and you have heard it from several players, that the buyers do pay premium prices for high integrity credits. So we need to focus on that. We need to see those next generation projects, which cost more, which have less credits in their baseline, but they will need a premium prices. And then, hopefully today, so we have a really excellent panel. I'm really looking forward to hearing about the more upstream parts. So obviously it all starts with the standards. We need to have high integrity standards. We have really good standards, the two biggest one here on the panel. We have some new standards emerging. We have seen the launch of a new standard yesterday, the ecosystem restoration standard. And they have been working on, again, looking forward to discussion how they are pushing the bar for the, last few years. And then we have the project developers, and we need project developers as well to, on the beginning of the value chain, to actually to be willing to go beyond what standards require sometimes, especially in this current flux of the market, and not trying to exploit loopholes. And there are some, right? Revalue Nature is one of those that is looking constantly how to raise the bar. There is one point we haven't talked much about, which I wanted to bring up, is the auditing capacity, which I think personally is one of the biggest problem in the ecosystem today. And we have seen a few, on the front pages of some of the newspapers, that some fraudulent projects have gone through, unfortunately, have been on the market. But is it the fault of Verra? Is it the fault of the standard? I'm sorry to say, but probably not, right? I think we need to recognize that there is a lack of capacity for the auditors. Since the CDM market collapsed, we had lost a lot of talent there. We need to bring that back. And also we might need to think about liability for the auditors, right? Because simply that's not something that the standards would be, I think, responsible for. We did touch upon ratings agencies. I think there is agreement that they play a really important role. I would just encourage them, for example, to start publishing data on who are the auditors of the junk-rated credits, for example, to give us some more data points, or start rating maybe the auditors so that project developers can choose better who they work with. Then we heard about, I think again, some of the points came up that we are at an inflection point. And I really wanted to also reemphasize that you just mentioned, we have decades of experience. For forest carbon, actually, we have 12 years, if we count it from 2011, when we had the first REDD+ credit in Kenya issued. So we have 12 years of experience. Things have changed. There's enormous technological, scientific developments. We had a very interesting technology panel where we could hear about the advanced remote sensing technologies. And it's time to reset. However, I also agree with those who said that, the fact that we have credits today that may be outdated, the methodologies are outdated, does that mean that they are bogus? No, absolutely not. They have been using the best available practices 10 years ago. It's just outdated. On the other side, companies who bought them 10 years ago, voluntarily, with no government pressure, and use them voluntarily, have they greenwashed with them? Absolutely no. I think we can be very grateful for them, and we should recognize that and not attack them for that. They actually made it possible through financing these pilot projects to have some actual experiences which we can now use to learn and to make some progress. So it's time to reset, and again, I think we will hear more about how the standards are adapting, how the jurisdictional approach evolved. 10 years ago, it was really far away targets, right? And now we have really some really good progress on that. And I think we're going to discuss more about what that brings. It might bring more challenges, as in some aspects more challenges, but also a lot more solutions. I might stop there because I think I have taken up time, but I have some additional points for later.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's great, Edith, and I really appreciate bringing your experience into this and kind of pointing out some of the key issues we're facing in the market and also tying it back really nicely to what we've heard over the course of the past few days. I think that was a really useful summary and kind of drawing it into the discussion we'll have now. And you briefly mentioned jurisdictional red, and so the question I have for Lucia is kind of just to kick us off. Could you explain to the room what is jurisdictional red, and sort of in the context of this panel in particular too, how can jurisdictional level and project level RED Plus initiatives coexist?
Yes, well, thank you very much. I think that this way of coexisting the jurisdictional RED and projects is part of this evolution of the carbon markets that we are experiencing. There's more and more recognition that we need forests in order to actually accomplish the goals of the Paris Agreement and to fight climate change. However, we do need scale. RED projects, the scale of projects is very valuable because it provides localized actions, it provides opportunities for engagement with local communities, it addresses local specific drivers. However, at the same time, in order to really face and fight the powerful deforestation drivers, and we're talking about industrial agriculture, mining, cattle raising, that are generated by very strong economic forces, we do need the engagement of many stakeholders, and especially governments. And we will need to make changes that only governments can make, such as recognizing indigenous rights for land tenure, for example, improving land tenure rights. Other things only governments can do is changing the economic incentives to certain economic activities. They can strengthen law enforcement, fight illegal activities. And those things at the scale of a jurisdiction are actually needed to then reduce the deforestation trends. So this is what jurisdictional RED is. And us in the architecture for RED Plus transactions, we have a standard. The name of the standard is TREES, and this is a standard to be used by jurisdictions to register RED programs at the scale of the whole national territory or a subnational territory. And so when you ask what it is, it's actually reducing, because it is not avoided emissions, because it's not based on what you're projecting that you will have, but is based on the deforestation rate that you had in the past, and you should reduce that deforestation rate in order to generate credits. And you will need to monitor the forest in your whole jurisdiction. So you will need to see how deforestation rates are changing there. That does not mean that projects cannot exist, right? So in that space, the challenge, of course, is that in order to have both and avoid double counting, you will need to subtract from the jurisdictional credits, the credits that the projects are generating. However, if the baselines of the projects and the jurisdictional program are based in completely different methodologies and completely different assumptions, then you will be comparing apples to oranges, and you will be punishing the jurisdictional program, right? Because if the jurisdictional program is reducing emissions based on what were the deforestation rates of the previous 5 years, and the project is, for example, using a baseline that was projected, that projected that deforestation was going to increase, then when you subtract those credits from the jurisdictional program, you would be punishing it. So the challenge now, and that does not mean that cannot be done, it's actually being done in a better and better way, just how to align those baselines, how to negotiate the benefit sharing with projects and with all those other activities that don't actually have the capacity to become projects, because that's what jurisdictional offers. Not every activity, not every stakeholder or landowner has the capacity to become a project because of size, investment, or other things. So now the challenge is how we include all of those actors in a program that will open opportunities for new stakeholders to participate in.
Thank you very much, Lucia. That was a really useful overview and definition of jurisdictional RED, some of the opportunities and also challenges it faces, certainly when it comes to, integrating projects as well. I'll turn to you, Juan Carlos. Now, I understand you've worked closely with Indigenous and local communities for nearly 2 decades, so I'm really curious to hear why you would say Indigenous peoples and local communities need to be involved in both RED Plus projects and also jurisdictional RED.
Thank you. I think so for Indigenous people and local community, not only from my group and for many Indigenous groups in Amazon Basin, it's always is a challenge to understand from the beginning we are asking some principles and protocols that we have it. How we designed that for many centuries, for many years, and on behalf of many leaders and elders that we talk in the community. We design the community for many days. So that is the way that we are asking is respect our protocols, or manner of culture or living, because it's a real challenge first at all to understand. We speak our first language and then the second language, national language, and then English, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's a challenge, and that we need to recognize that. And then for many centuries, we were standby, living there in the forest. Many articles recently, they are recognizing how much the contribution Indigenous people are doing with the forest, with the ecosystems, the pristine forest, still there. The 80%, they recognize they're still in our territories and our ecosystems. And these are some values that we want to put in the table, but as Indigenous leaders, Indigenous communities, when we get together, so we are asking the governance, and we need to see how our principles or rights to be recognized by the governments, some companies. Sometimes they are not applying, just recognized as signatories in the high level, national level. But in the ground, sometimes that's disappear these documents. So this is something that we need to always remind to society and partners in a good faith that how much we are doing and they're living there in the forest. We have threats, yes, and this is this opportunity sometimes that big acronyms like RED, what means RED, or RED Plus, what is RED Plus? We need to translate this. We need to process this, and then people have to understand this in their own language and their own visions. Because for us, for forests, water, we cannot be disconnected with that. We think in holistic, integrate. We are part of the forest as Indigenous people. We live in the forest. We eat from the forest. So, and then this opportunity to bring these concepts, to bring us in the table, to learn ourselves also, to discuss between us, and say, yes, we are going to participate, but we ask in respect rights. We ask in respect, even that we don't think the same, we need to respect, and this is the way how to proceed to connect each other, And then after that, one level and second level, there's initiatives like these scientific documents that they are demonstrated that, for example, that in many Indigenous territories that we are living there, there's concepts like the dimension that there is a low deforestation in our bigger territory, right? I mean, this is a new acronym, this opportunity, how we can connect this opportunity. because you have a lot of forests, you have a lot of opportunity to connect these concepts about markets, right? Carbon credits, etc. So this has a level of understanding. But we put rules between us, because the self-determination as indigenous people, we need to respect people who don't want to go in there. Even to her, some words like carbon, company, scare us. It scares people. So we need to translate that into cultural way. These are many processes. This asking demands time. It's not just very quickly that some people say, we need to make this business, we need to talk to the leaders. No, we are collective thinking. Yeah, because that the resources that we have is for the community. And then we ask the opportunity. So this is something that I just want to bring here. In many cases, many indigenous people, they are working with these initiatives. We are learning how they were working. I mean, for many years, we developed our own concepts, how to match it. Some governments are trying to connect our vision with carbon credits, jet jurisdictional, et cetera, et cetera. So this is something that we need to put on the table. Always we're going to present on behalf of rights, indigenous people rights, and then we are part of the ecosystem, part of the forest, until that's why we are stand by and defending. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juan Carlos. I really appreciate that, and yeah, really useful to get your perspective not only on the importance of indigenous people's participation in this process, but also some of the ways in which companies and project developers can actually, understand ways in which they can, be more sensitive to incorporating indigenous peoples into this process. So I really appreciate that. It was some of the challenges, but also some of the solutions that you presented. So I'll turn now to Julie to get another standards perspective on this topic. And the question we want to ask of you is, and I'm sure it won't be a surprise, but so there's been some concerns raised recently about the integrity of verified carbon units, particularly those issued from RED projects. So how should those concerns be considered in the context of this conversation on integrity that we're having now?
Yeah, thanks for that question, and also thanks for including Verra on this panel. We have addressed the issues in a bunch of different posts and a bunch of different public fora, including the one that was mentioned in the last session. I want to go back to what Todd Stevens said yesterday and what Edit was just referring to, in that, we've had 10 years of RED projects, and we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, because in the early days, yes, there were some issues where indigenous people and local community rights were being violated, and we've weeded out the majority of those projects, and hopefully all of them, but you'll have to tell me if I'm wrong. But we feel that indigenous people and local communities are key to the success of RED projects. So I just wanted to make that note before moving on. And so we have been using a reference region model to develop baselines for RED projects, which is what most of the criticisms have been about most recently. And so that model was developed by leading experts 10 years ago, over 10 years ago now, and things have changed in the interim time, and we have 5 different RED methodologies now. All of them can be used a little bit differently, and we need to consolidate those RED methodologies, and we have been working on that since 2020 at least, if not earlier. And so we published in 2021 a jurisdictional nested RED program, version 4, that uses a risk mapping and allocation approach. And so that we want to create a new RED methodology, and we've been working on this new RED methodology since 2020 that will take that approach and translate it into RED projects. So we do think that the control point methodologies that we are using in our IFM and ARR, afforestation, reforestation, and restoration, or revegetation methodologies, are valid and really good methods for identifying deforestation and particularly removals. However, we, in line with what Lucia was saying about governments needing to move to jurisdictional approaches, we feel that for avoiding unplanned deforestation, we need to move to a jurisdictional approach as well. So Lucia mentioned some capacity constraints that governments have that governments have and local communities have in developing their own baselines. And so what Verra is doing is trying to step in and actually develop the data ourselves, or take data that's available from all these different remote sensing and satellite imagery and new GIS technologies, take advantage of all of that data that has been developed, even at the national country level, if we can get it, that meets our standards, and allocate it to projects ourselves, so that we know that what data is being used in a specific jurisdiction is all the same data for a 6-year baseline validity period. And we're transitioning projects to that new methodology as soon as we can. And the new methodology is coming out hopefully in Q3 of this year. I mean, definitely in Q3 of this year. But it can't be used without the activity data that Verra is going to allocate. And so we're going to try to get all of that data available and allocated as soon as possible to as many projects as possible, so that we won't have this proliferation of methodologies, and we will have one singular methodology going forward. However, to Edith's point also about the validity of credits that are in the market, people shouldn't shy away from using those, because they are the best quality credits that were available at the time. And those credits, by buying those credits, you are directly financing forest conservation. So they are valid tons, and Verra stands behind all our credits. We have an AFLU, agriculture, forestry, and agriculture, land use, agriculture, forestry, and other land use. Get so lost in these acronyms, right? Non-permanence buffer that guarantees, that backs up all of those credits on a permanence basis. So I would be happy to talk more about that. Got lost there. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, thanks, Julie. No, that's really useful to get your perspective, and appreciate you answering that question as well. And I have one technological note for the panelists, and I don't know if this is directed at anyone in particular, but if you could just make sure you're holding the mic up close to your mouth, that'd be great. And then, Breanna, we wanted to come to you last because EDF and partners have been working on a guide, and we thought that you talking about that, it's already come up, I think, in another panel, but you talking about that guide would really help sort of tie in everything we've heard so far from the various perspectives that we have on the panel. So could you please tell us about the recently launched Tropical Forest Credit Integrity Guide, please?
Yes, definitely. So before I dive into what the guide is, I think one of the perks of going last or being part of the last panel is you kind of get to reflect on all the great things that have been discussed. And so I just want to zoom out a little bit and touch on some of the themes that are really relevant to the Tropical Forest Credit Integrity Guide. So we've heard a lot about scale, both in terms of kind of the impacts that we need as well as the level of implementation. So jurisdictional REDD+, for example. We've heard a lot about the importance of partnerships with Indigenous peoples and local communities, and the respect of their rights and the integral role that they play in these climate finance processes. We've heard that there are tools available now, like ArtTrees and Verra, to help us guide the voluntary carbon market. And we've heard that companies really clearly need guidance to help them make sense of this very confusing space. So the Tropical Forest Credit Integrity Guide, and I'm going to throw another acronym, TFCI, because otherwise I'll have to keep repeating the very long name, builds on all of these themes. So now what is it? So yesterday, Todd Stevens of WCS spoke a little bit about it, but I'm going to kind of dig in a little bit deeper. So 8 authoring organizations, including EDF, COICA, WCS, all came together because we recognized that we needed to scale tropical forest conservation and that there was a rising demand for tropical forest carbon credits. So we came together to create the TFCI to define what good looks like when we're talking about tropical forest carbon credits, and to help provide that clarity that companies needed. So the overarching goal is through these consensus recommendations to give companies the information they need to be able to differentiate tropical forest carbon credits by impact, quality, and scale so that they can have the confidence that what they're purchasing is high integrity. So in terms of what's actually in the guide, and just a side note that it is available online to download now, so I'd encourage you all to read it. It's tfci.org, I think. But just search Tropical Forest Credit Integrity Guide and you can dig into all of these details. But at a super high level, so it's split into kind of two components. The first is 6 consensus recommendations, and these kind of outline the goals and the outcomes and the direction of travel that we're hoping kind of companies will take. And 2 top-line recommendations. Again, there are a total of 6, but I'll just breeze through 2. So one is to rapidly shift demand towards credits from jurisdictional scale programs, recognizing the role of high quality and nested projects as well. And the other is ensuring that IPLCs, Indigenous peoples and local communities, are part of decision-making processes from the outset as partners and not just as beneficiaries. So that's part 1. Part 2 is implementation guidance. NGOs love to kind of dole out guidance and then say, okay, now you go and implement. So we thought, well, let's put together some implementation recommendations as well to guide companies step by step on how to actually implement the recommendations that we're proposing. And there are a total of 4 of those. The first is to plan your tropical forest credit portfolio to align with global needs. The second is to build your portfolio with purchases that drive demand for high-quality jurisdictional scale crediting, including HFLD credits. The third is to conduct due diligence to ensure high-quality credits. And then the fourth is to follow up with complementary actions and just stay updated with the latest evolutions in the space. So again, encourage you to read about all of this in the guide, which is available online, but I'll stop there for the sake of time. Thanks.
Thanks, Breanna. And I think we're actually going to stick with you to kind of kick off the next round, and then we'll sort of go around again. But just to build on what you've said, and you've probably touched on this already in your description, but maybe just to kind of hammer it home, how does the guide that you've described fit into the broader voluntary carbon market landscape, and specifically, how is it helping to drive integrity?
Sure, happy to take that. I would love to hear others' views on this question as well. So again, we know that the space is super crowded. We know that there's a lot of guidance out there, which can make it challenging for companies. And so that's really kind of one of the main motivating factors for the TFCI. And so we're hoping that at the end of the day, these recommendations that the 8 organizations kind of came together to develop really provides that clear guidance that companies need with respect to tropical forest carbon credits. And so yesterday, Todd Stevens mentioned, of WCS, mentioned that one of the really valuable things, I think, of this process was that it brought together these 8 organizations. I will spare you from me listing them all, but these 8 organizations with very different views on kind of what the right path forward is to scale tropical forest conservation, brought us together, put us in a room, metaphorically, to build an understanding, figure out where people stand along this spectrum, and then come together to figure out, okay, what is actually needed to drive this change that we're hoping to see. So the recommendations are consensus recommendations, and we think that's really valuable as well. But kind of more broadly in the voluntary carbon market landscape, we're just hoping that the TFCI can be a useful resource to drive alignment around kind of the key elements of integrity. So this is specific to tropical forest carbon credits, but I think a lot of the lessons learned can be helpful for us thinking about carbon credit integrity generally. So yesterday, Julia of the NCSA mentioned the buyer's guide. We've also talked some about the ICVCM, so there's a lot going on in this space, and we're really hoping that the TFCI can be complementary and build on what these initiatives are trying to do. At the end of the day, we're all trying to drive integrity, we're all trying to provide clarity, and so we're just hoping to be able to contribute to that. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, no, really appreciate that, and I think as we hoped, you tied a nice bow on the remarks of everyone we've heard from so far. Maybe I'll move back to you, Juan Carlos, and be curious to hear from your perspective, what do you believe is key for the effective participation of IPLCs in climate finance processes and carbon markets, which I think you touched on already a little bit, but if there's anything you sort of want to drive home for this room, that would be really useful. And if I can ask you for sort of one more thing, if there are any positive examples that you can point to of effective IPLC participation in these processes from your sort of broad global experiences, or also from the Amazon as well, I think that would be really useful for the room to hear if you have a specific example to direct us to.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I will try to summarize. I don't know how much time I have because it's long to explain. As I mentioned in the beginning, we are doing a lot of effort and to have our own team that we trust in the community. So this team, there are some, the elders, we have our knowledge. We have our knowledge. We know very, very well where we live, what we have in our own data, in our traditional knowledge. That's what I want to remark. We have language, we have knowledge, we have culture for many, many centuries. And I can talk a lot about this and share many examples. So that challenge is that we are passing this information to our generations because these generations need to continue protecting and defending and to protect what we have, the only home where we have, forests, rainforests, and all the resources there. There's under threats, yes, under threats. We have many problems there in the ground. But continuing and trying to mention here is that it be important to participate, to be working in this invitation with EDF, is our partner, with our, the tropical forest and with credit integrity. We were working hard. I was invited there. I have some colleagues, indigenous brothers and sisters there, to sit in with the other side, with scientific group, from the many NGOs and partners, with PhD, with scientific language. Even my colleagues here, acronyms, it's difficult acronyms. We need to remember, but this is part of this challenge. And we understand this, but we need to explain this again. It takes time to explain to our elders, our people. We cannot make decisions by myself. We make collective decisions because for benefit for everybody. So being participating was a great experience that we respect to understand the other information, high-level language. Also, we have great information from our ground, from our culture. This being an experience to combine knowledge of what we have as indigenous people, what information we have in our knowledge, scientific knowledge, right? How we not just see, how we talk, how we eat, and how we love the resources, the forest, everything what you can get the benefits from the forest, from the trees, medicine, whatever you want, spirituality, everything. So this is something that we need to connect and to put in the guidance in the context about our rights, right? It's been a real challenge. I've been, for my colleagues and my leaders, we present that results and we are happy so far. Maybe it's not perfect, no, even for us, but we are there. We were invited there. We did something, not just be complaining, indigenous people only likes to fight, indigenous people don't understand, indigenous people. Yes, we claim about our rights. We claim about respect. But we claim about full and effective participation from the beginning, transparency, friendship, open up the book. Why we need to hide? If we want to work together, we need to create this relationship. And the second one, I decided to bring examples from the ground. Is my friend from Peru here in the back, Chimatani. Can you stand up? He's one of my brothers. He's really, really a great leader. He don't speak English, but we can help you to translate. But he is working, doing examples on the ground. Red plus or red indigenous from the Amazon, trying to match this carbon. But the problem is that sometimes this big pledge of money is going very top. It's not going in the community. It's not coming. We don't see that. We just heard. We just read. And this is something that we are asking to the partners in a good way. So we are working also here with my colleagues from R3, trying to do the capacity building with Franklin and Lucia, and maybe with Verra. Well, sometimes you're welcome to come to the community in the jungle. But this is the way that we need to. It's not because we are ignorant. It's not capacity building for ignorant, savage, indigenous people. No. It's because we want to share. We want to combine, to process what you want to do and benefit to save this against this crisis, what is happening right now. Everybody, we need to put something. Indigenous people, we are doing a lot. We were doing something on the ground. I have examples, sometimes with no money. But we are protecting the forest, standing by there, giving our lives there, etc. I can keep going. That's what I say. I'm going to make this short, but the point is that my brother there and other brothers, they are doing with some plans of life, with managing forests, and just we're ready to connect with inversions and opportunity. That my people is ready. There's not time for this urgency. Yeah. So that is the demand that I really appreciate this invitation. Also some partners like EDF and colleagues here who are working. We are training ourselves with concepts that we need to translate that in the intercultural translation, because we have many languages there, many indigenous groups. Even 60 groups in the Amazon basin, they are not contacted yet with this 21st century. It's not, they are living free, but under pressure. And we don't want these carbon boys coming to make this disaster there, to lie there, to make agreements there, etc., etc. But finally, I'm sorry, but I just to put my point here is that we have examples. We have data, we have good friends who we trust. Also, there's bad friends, I don't want to mention that, but there's a good partners and a good faith. So we are ready to connect and to do action. We want to do that. We are doing it really. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, and I think it's a nice note to not end on, but open it to the floor. But yeah, really appreciate that message of urgency and also bringing us back down to the ground and where the action is happening, which is a really important place to remind us of as we're talking about integrity. So at this point, I'll open it to the floor for questions. So I welcome anyone who still has some energy at the end of today. Any questions?
Hi, Paulo from NCX again. I guess one of the key things or the building blocks of a healthy carbon biodiversity market in the tropics especially, it's secure land property rights and tenure rights, right? And I might be wrong, and I'd love to hear from the panel, who, and I know that in RED this is one of the main components in RED+, but for a lot of people, developers and probably buyers too, it'd be very important to have more visibility into who is actually leading the charge on pressuring governments, which are the only ones that are responsible for that, on improving property rights and securing them for indigenous peoples, but also for everyone that owns the land, because that is the first step for any market. Without that, there cannot be any market. And for a lot of us, I think it would be really important to know who do we partner with, who can we reach out that will give us clarity on how to proceed, where to proceed, and not to be confrontational with governments, of course, but how to put as much pressure as possible to solve that problem.
Really important question. Does anyone on the panel want to take that?
You can take it.
Thanks, Julie. And
so we've seen that is the value of project developers. And I know that project developers can't do it all in most cases, but in areas where we've seen jurisdictional and nested red get closest to being being a program is where project developers have really helped the government establish tenure rights or worked with the government to help build capacity in the government, not just for land tenure, but for any kind of on-the-ground activity, and engaged with the communities in their local areas to build up an example of what a government could look to say, hey, this is something I can either replicate or enable by having enabling governance, like regulations or laws. So that's what I would say. And then there's also a ton of capacity building that's been done by other organizations, not either UN Red or FCPF, those kinds of organizations. And then in specific instances, we have seen project developers be able to change land tenure laws and enable avoidance of deforestation by that change alone. So yeah, I know it's not possible in all cases, but that's what we've seen be most effective.
Thanks for that, Julie. Did anyone else want to come in on that question?
Maybe I just want to share something. May I have?
Yeah, please.
Thank you for your question. Because when we want to sit down with the government. We have our own process, but we always accept the invitation. We sit down at the table, and then we see the possibilities, because sometimes there is no very easy to open bridge to talk, right? Because there are many dimensions, political situations sometimes that, but in the moment that we sit down, we respect, we appreciate that because we are also citizens. We are part of the country. Sometimes some family, I have relatives in Peru, in the border. We don't create that borders. So other families, they live in the twin countries, you know. But when we sit down and then we ask how we can contribute, how we can work, we say, we don't look at us just only as a beneficiary. Treat us like partners, equal. And then we begin to keep going and say, think also how we are contributing. I mean, how much we are doing. Depends, but let us know what you are making deals in the international arena. Because sometimes many of my leaders or my friends, they're traveling around the world, and they listen, sometimes they are lying. It's not connected with the reality. But to finalize here, we have, from the actions that we complain, we have proposed. We have initiatives, ready. And we need to connect that and to keep going on the point that you were mentioning with the property and et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions in the room? Otherwise, we have some more questions for the panel. So maybe going to you, Lucia, kind of back to the standards perspective that you bring, but you mentioned trees. How does your standard trees address some of the key integrity elements that we've talked about, such as additionality and then social environmental safeguards as well? Could you just sort of describe that a little bit for us? I think you've touched on it already, but sort of just bringing that back.
Yes, no, additionality, I think I talked a little bit before, as how the baseline in trees or the crediting level is based on the average previous 5 years deforestation rate. So it's actually reducing your deforestation rate for what you were doing before and not from a projected increase. And also you have to recalculate that every 5 years, which means you are raising ambition every 5 years, right? Because you will use the previous 5 years that you already reduced. So you're always, raising the ambition in terms of if you will generate credits, then you need to keep reducing that baseline. But I think I would like to talk a little bit more about safeguards. And as you know, the Conference of the Parties of the UNFCCC agreed on the Cancun safeguards, which all RED projects have to address and respect. And in trees, verifying the actual emission reductions and verifying the respect of the safeguards are two things that are verified at the same level. So you cannot generate credits if you didn't reduce your emissions, but also you cannot generate credits if you did not address and respect the safeguards. Within those safeguards, as you know, there is the full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and local communities, the respect of the rights and the traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples and local communities, and that's already there. But I want to say that now what we want to do in partnership with the organization where Juan Carlos works and other indigenous peoples organizations, as for example the organization ANECAP, where Fermin also works, and other indigenous peoples organizations, is we're working in a new certification, because while doing RED, yes, the rights need to be respected and safeguards need to be respected, but at the same time, there are social, biodiversity, and climate benefits beyond carbon benefits that need to be generated to have a robust and sustainable initiative. So until now, benefits is something that is more anecdotal, so each program will tell you what social benefits are there. And so we're now partnering with these indigenous peoples organizations so that they can help us develop a list of measurements, criteria, indicators that are relevant for indigenous peoples and local communities in terms of social and cultural benefits that can then be certified as part of the RED programs, so that you can show not only the respect of the safeguards, but also what are these additional benefits that are being generated. And you're not only going to claim that, but it's going to be part of what you're going to be verified against.
Perfect, thanks, Lucia. That was a really useful way to describe how a standard is addressing a lot of the things we've just talked about from Juan Carlos's perspective, and also the questions we've had. So really appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, just a question from the online chat. How do you perceive the role carbon credit raters play for carbon market integrity, and how do we ensure that they're held to the same degree of scrutiny like established VCM actors?
The ratings?
How do you perceive the role carbon credit raters play for carbon market integrity?
Okay, yeah, good question. Edit, yeah.
Take that one.
Yes, thanks. That's a very good question. And I think there was an interesting point on one of the previous panels that they need to also share their data, and we need to collaborate, and the accuracy measurements and all that. So I think they play a really important role, especially at this crucial time. If and as and when we have the new methodologies and you know the standards are there and we don't have to do this additional due diligence, I think their role might transition to somewhere more like rating indeed the co-benefits or some of the others. I sincerely hope we don't have to rate a ton, whether a ton is a ton. We have to get over that, get a threshold and work with the uncertainty around that and accept that you might have some margin of error. But at this point of time, I think they play a very important role. They also, I think, can play an important role in more upstream. Some of the things, some of the ratings agencies are looking to collaborate with project developers in the pre-validation phase, and I think that's critical. That we work on pre-ratings and help shape, not just say, oh, that's bad, that's good. That has its limits, right? So I think that's important. And I also already mentioned before, I think we need to rate also the auditors. You can rate project developers over time. But yeah, I think they have a good role and help us push the whole ecosystem. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Edit. Did anyone else want to come in on ratings?
Sure, I would just say from standards perspective that we really appreciate that there are many ratings agencies and that they all rate different projects. They're independent of each other. We appreciate when ratings agencies have a transparent methodology so that we can then take what we learn from the ratings and improve our project methodologies if that needs to happen, or improve our standard if that needs to happen. So I agree with Edit. I hope that I hope that their role transitions, and I'm really interested in this pre-validation assessment idea. But yeah, I really appreciate the ratings agencies. That's it.
Great, thank you. Were there any other questions online or in the room? If not, I think I'll just give each of you maybe a minute to, any closing words, things you want to drive home for the audience, and we can go in order as we're sitting on the sofa. So, Edit, you first.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think that was a very interesting discussion. I'm really very interested to hear about this new standard and how the trees will add this co-benefit standard. I think that's one of the points. This conference is very nice because we have the biodiversity and carbon quite holistic approach, and one of the takeaways as well is that what we heard previously, that we can now do quantification of the biodiversity net gain, and we can start doing these baselines on them. So one of the things I think which will come up in the future if we don't start that properly, there might be some greenwashing issues around biodiversity claims. So I think we really do encourage people, project developers and others to go towards the quantification on biodiversity. That's going to be the next one. On the benefit share and revenue share we did touch upon, I think I would just add that there's unfortunately no silver bullet. We as developers just have to be transparent about it, and I think we just have to work on some assessment frameworks. What is a fair risk-adjusted return for the capital for what needs to be there to invest in the project. And I also would add that we will have to start auditing those financial flows as well. I think it's not enough to just rely on the numbers, and I'm saying that from a project developer perspective. It does add costs, but I think it will help with the robustness of the market. And then finally, on a last word, if I had to summarize, I think, again, from project developers' perspective, in these crucial times when we don't have yet all the rules, the key is really to radically increase transparency. We need to show our books. We need to show the data sets. We have good models, but if you put garbage in, you get garbage out. So the only way we can help buyers and investors to get comfortable is to increase transparency, and we would encourage Verra to require much more disclosure in the PDDs and all the public documents, and some of the developers will be happy to do that to start with, but yeah, we encourage more disclosure, more transparency. Thank you.
Sure, and I thank you, everyone, for sharing such amazing perspectives. I learned a lot. That's just a personal reflection. The few notes that I would end on is, we can't delay action any further to scale tropical forest conservation. There are a lot of tools out there. There's a lot of guidance out there, and we're here as EDF and hopefully partners to work with you all to figure out how to drive alignment and continue to drive integrity in the voluntary carbon market, recognizing the role that it can play. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I think one of the main takeaways that I'm thinking of is that the carbon markets and all the stakeholders, so the buyers, the sellers, are actually prepared to take further steps in terms of integrity, quality, partnerships with stakeholders that were not usually partners from the beginning, and that that readiness has been established by previous experiences, but now in order to take those steps, we have to be able to first scale up. So yes, continue having projects, but moving towards jurisdictional RED+ programs. Second, being able to partner from the beginning with the landowners, with indigenous peoples, with the local communities, and from the beginning means from the design of the methodologies, from the design of the projects, of the programs, and we have to be also prepared to understand new types of or new ways to include all the different moments where forests are. So how to include, yes, historic emitters in forests, but also how to include historic protectors, because as Juan Carlos said, there are these territories that have been historically protected, but that are facing increased threats. And if we cannot include them properly in the carbon markets, we risk losing all that's being protected.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. Just want to mention that always we want that we have some principles that we don't going to decline. Always we're going to put on the table about our indigenous people rights, local community rights, for the people who don't have the voice and the chance to bring that in the international arena or different areas. So we as indigenous people, we have governance, we have institutionality. Many of the countries that are in the international arena, there are signatories about this. We are asking that they need to apply and respect that. And also we are asking from the beginning the principles of the free, prior, informed consent, etc. And also we are asking transparent and good faith. We want to work and to understand. And we have our process, we have our time. But finally, as indigenous people, we are telling that and looking partners and to collaborate. Also because, as you know, working with us, working together with many multi-actors, so academia, scientifics, indigenous people, all together with respect, we can move forward to do change. From your institution, from our side, together we can move things and change things. So otherwise, if we don't listen to each other, we don't respect each other, and we are there, we are home, we are there walking, we stand by there. So, but we are collaborating. We don't want anymore to be visible. We need to be visibilizations clear in this whole process. We have initiatives, connect with my brothers and sisters, support our brothers and sisters, and there we are, we can do this together.
So I like Juan Carlos's point about collaboration. I think that we are at an inflection point in the voluntary carbon market, at least, and with organizations like ICVCM and BCMI coming out with guidelines in this next month and year, and even the rating aids agencies and media criticism means that we need to change and evolve, and that will constantly happen, and Verra is glad to be a part of it. But I think we all need to just keep in mind the big picture, and maybe this is a note to end on, is that we're all trying to advance climate change mitigation, adaptation, and sustainable development. So whether it's a carbon unit or a biodiversity credit or some other form of financing, that's what we're all trying to get to. And we just need to make sure that the appropriate tool, utilizing all the advanced data and remote sensing stuff that we've come up with and moving toward a jurisdictional approach where appropriate is, it's a constant process of evolution, but we need to keep in mind the big picture and just make sure that we are all headed the same way in collaboration with each other.
Thanks so much. I really like that note to end on of collaboration. And Edith, I think in your opening remarks, you talked about like, what are we all trying to do here? And Julie, you nicely reminded us at the end that we all have a common goal, which I think is such a lovely way to end the conference. I know we have another, I think a workshop or roundtable after this, but thanks very much to all the panelists, and I'll end it here. Thanks very much.